Good afternoon. I now call this meeting on the Standing Committee on Social Development to order. My name is Caitlin Cleveland. I am the MLA for Cam Lake and chair of this committee. The Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territory Standing Committee on Social Development is made up of regular members who can look deeper into social issues affecting NWT residents. Amongst its other responsibilities, committee is currently reviewing the proposed changes to the Education Act and to the school curricula. To start us off today, we have a much nicer day out there. It seems like the territory is warming up all across the board, and so I've got a bit of a fresh prayer to start us off with today. So if I can lead members through, that would be great. We are here together. I am no better or worse than anyone else. I am on a unique journey, yet through I see our differences, it is still true that we are more alike than we are unalike. What I put out into the world always comes back to me. Today I offer loving kindness, positive energy, and joyful service. I choose to leave the world a better place than I found it. Today I ask, how can I help? I know that when I lift another up, I am lifted too, because I am part of something bigger than myself. I honor our differences and embrace our similarities. Through my positive communion with others, I know peace in my heart, harmony on earth, and joy in my journey. Thank you, everybody. And that's from Healing Brave, which is an organization that can be found online and has some positive prayer. So our first order of business this morning is the review and adoption of the agenda. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this afternoon we have 3 presentations from the Department of Education, Culture and Employment. The first one will be on the early learning and childcare strategy, followed by a brief break. Then a presentation on the JK-12 curriculum renewal, again followed by a break, and then finally on a presentation on the Education Act Modernization. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burla. Are there any additions or changes that anyone would like to see to the agenda this morning? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? By voice of one of my colleagues.
Yeah, Rocky.
Thank you, MLA Simpson. MLA Simpson has moved adoption of the agenda, and having reviewed adoption of the agenda, are there any conflicts of interest this afternoon? Hearing none, today committee will hear from the Department of Education, Culture and Employment on topics including development of the Early Learning and Childcare Strategy 2030, the JK-12 curriculum renewal, and the Education Act Modernization. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels, and presentation materials will be available on the Legislative Assembly's website after the meeting has concluded. To respect physical distancing requirements, all witnesses will be attending by video conference, and I can confirm that all MLAs are as well. I would like to remind all members and our witnesses that all comments, questions, and remarks will need to be directed to myself as the chair of the committee, and both members and the witnesses will need to wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking. I will now ask members to introduce themselves for the record, starting with MLA Semler. Sometimes technology gets the better of us across the Northwest Territories, and so Emma can confirm MLA Semler's on the line. I can see her there. Oh, go ahead. Yep, we can hear you.
Lisa Semler, MLA for Nuvik Twin Lakes.
Rylan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North. You're just fine now, Lisa. Glad to be here.
Hello, MLA Norn, MLA for Tunetha-Willida.
Simpson, MLA.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Okay, I can confirm that we've got more members on the line. We also have joining us today MLA Bonnet Rouge, MLA for the DHO, we have MLA Simpson for Hay River South. We also have MLA Norn. MLA Norn, can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you, folks. Let's pass it over to Minister R.J. Simpson to introduce himself and his staff and to proceed with opening remarks. Thank you, Minister Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the members for attending and to everyone at home watching our presentation today. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the Standing Committee today on several exciting initiatives being led by the Department of Education, Culture and Employment with the goal of achieving improved outcomes for children and youth in the NWT. I have a number of staff with me today, including Rita Mueller, Deputy Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, Shannon Barnett-Aikman, Assistant Deputy Minister, Education and Culture, Sam Shannon, Assistant Deputy Minister, Corporate Services, Shelley Capralian, Director, Early Learning and Childcare, Jessica Brace, Director, Curriculum Development and Student Assessment, Benjamin Hendrickson, Senior Legislative Advisor, Education Act Modernization, Julia Mott, Senior Advisor to the Deputy Minister, and my Ministerial Special Advisor, Rhona Sherigan. Madam Chair, today's presentations will provide committee with an overview of the ongoing work to engage our government partners, key stakeholders, and the public on these three keystone initiatives. These include the development of a 2030 early learning and childcare strategy for the NWT, work to renew the junior kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum, and the Education Act Modernization Initiative. These important initiatives support our government's mandate to advance universal childcare by increasing availability and affordability of licensed early learning and childcare spaces, and to increase JK-12 student education outcomes to the same level as the rest of Canada. Making sure that every child and youth from every background and region in the Northwest Territories has equitable access to relevant, culturally appropriate, and quality childcare and education will ultimately lead to improved well-being across all our communities in the North. By fully engaging our partners, stakeholders, and residents as we work towards making improvements in these areas, we will succeed in renewing our education system and advancing quality early learning and childcare across the NWT. I would like to thank committee for their continued interest in these topics of education and early learning and childcare, and for allowing us to engage you in these discussions. This concludes my opening remarks, and would be pleased to answer any questions or comments that the members may have. If committee would like, we can also begin with the very first presentation, which will be taken over by Ms. Barnett-Aikman.
Thank you, Minister Simpson. Let's proceed with the presentations, and we'll do questions and comments following the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ms. Shelley Capralian will also be joining that presentation. I'd like to hand it over to Ms. Barnett-Aikman. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Ms. Capralian.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and thank you, Minister Simpson. Thank you to the committee for the opportunity to present to you today on the discussion paper to inform the development of the 2030 Early Learning and Childcare Strategy. While this presentation includes much of the content in the discussion paper, which has been shared with you, we do invite you to provide written comments as well in follow-up after this afternoon. Moving to slide 2, please, of this slide deck. This slide overviews how today's presentation is essentially captured within 3 large sections, iterative of the discussion paper. The first being the impetus for and our foundational thinking that contributes to the development of the 2030 Early Learning and Childcare Strategy. Then we will move into an overview of the current status of early learning and childcare here in the NWT, which will really speak to our current landscape. And then finally, we'll move into some guiding questions, which were really intended to invite comments and feedback that reflect the NWT community needs, and certainly, of course, welcome your personal perspectives in any number of areas. We've suggested 7 proposed areas that are outlined here on this slide, but certainly any other areas that you feel are meaningful as well. If we could move to slide 3, please. So as you know, the mandate of the 19th Legislative Assembly includes advancing universal childcare by increasing availability and affordability. This includes a commitment to develop a strategy to increase that availability and to reduce the costs of childcare in our communities. As of right now, there is no standard model or definition for universal childcare in Canada. It's often interpreted to mean extremely subsidized and accessible care for everyone, but there are multiple elements beyond just the fees and the cost to families that are essential for us to consider when looking at advancing towards a model of universal childcare. And those would include available infrastructure, the number of qualified early childhood educators, and of course, accessibility. And when we're speaking of accessibility, that certainly can also be broken down into the elements of inclusivity, where all children are welcome, including those with varying developmental abilities, the affordability, obviously, and then, of course, community support. So this discussion we're having today will really assist us here at the department with drafting that 2030 early learning and childcare strategy in line with the GNWT mandate of advancing towards universal childcare. Certainly by increasing availability and affordability, as well as making sure we have current best practice in place in all of our programs. The strategy will need to consider many elements involved in improving access to high quality, affordable, and inclusive early learning and childcare programs in the NWT. It won't necessarily result in childcare becoming free for families. So in order to be sustainable and effective, the kind of improvements we're going to need to focus on include that quality infrastructure, community need and interest, of course, to make sure it's grounded in the space and place of where the programs are located, having trained early child care staff, and then, of course, financial investments and time to support the sector as it continues to grow here in the territory. If we could move, please, to slide 4. So here we've got some data on the number of licensed early learning and childcare programs, as well as the breakdown of licensed childcare spaces in each region of the NWT. EC&E does not operate licensed early learning and childcare programs. Instead, what we do is we license, inspect, provide funding subsidies and other supports for Indigenous governments, nonprofit organizations, and individuals who do operate those licensed early learning and childcare programs. All early learning and childcare programs are community driven, and they're operated by community members who are in the best position to understand and meet the needs of the families within their unique communities. As of March this year, 2021, the NWT has 122 licensed early learning and childcare programs with a total of just under 2,000 potential childcare spaces. Licensed childcare programs here in the NWT consist of center-based programs and family day homes for children from birth to school entry, and out-of-school programs as well for school-aged children between 4 and 11 years old. And although the number fluctuates, there are currently 13 communities in the NWT that do not have licensed childcare. Those are listed for you in the notes that accompany this slide deck. Each of those communities has specific circumstances that have led to a lack of childcare within their context. And some of those include the community potentially not having any children or few children in the 0 to 6 age range, so there just isn't a demand for this service. It could be the family's preference to have extended family mind their children, or to pursue a more traditional cultural model of childcare over a Western model of childcare. There may be difficulty operating a nonprofit organization that's run by a volunteer society. In some instances, there's no available space or infrastructure to hold such a program. And of course, the alternative to that sometimes is that there's also no qualified or trained early learning and childcare educators in the community. So there are a number of factors, and in some instances, obviously, it may be multiple situations of those points I just outlined. So the bottom line to us is that it's important to have flexibility within the NWT early learning and childcare system to support the community members as they're building the early learning and childcare programs that reflect, as I said, the unique context that's facing them there on the ground. If we could move to slide 5, please. So here you have a snapshot of the current enrollment of the number of 4-year-olds in the junior kindergarten and 5-year-olds in the kindergarten programs of our public education system. Junior kindergarten and kindergarten are examples of high-quality, play-based early learning and childcare programs that we have embedded within our community schools. And this is a significant step toward enhancing that access to quality, affordable early learning programs. As of 2017-2018 school year, all NWT families with 4 and 5-year-old children have the option to access that free play-based early learning program within that community school context. And this current year in 2021, we have 525 junior kindergarten students, 4-year-olds, and 602 5-year-old kindergarten students enrolled in our NWT schools. Following that territory-wide implementation of junior kindergarten 4-year-olds, the NWT focus on advancing the model of universal childcare has shifted to support the accessibility for early learning and childcare opportunities for children from birth to 3 years old. And if we could move, please, to slide 6. So this slide gives you a sense of the various frameworks and foundation documents that have been developed and implemented over the last 8 or more years that have really shaped and informed our continuing work in supporting quality early childhood development and early learning and childcare here in the NWT. The GNWT absolutely cannot approach our early childhood development alone. Obviously, it has to be a shared approach through partnership with parents and caregivers, elders and Indigenous governments, healthcare workers, licensed childcare operators, early childhood educators, local communities. This is really, we're not speaking about any one entity being able to achieve really, truly high quality, accessible, affordable childcare operating in isolation. This is really about our partnerships. So by working collaboratively, we can ensure children receive the very best care and attention to enable them to be healthy and reach their full potentials. Enhancing that availability and affordability of childcare is an ongoing and continuous focus for us here at EC&E. In 2013, as you very likely already know, the Departments of Health and Social Services and EC&E released the Right from the Start, which was a framework for early childhood development here in the NWT. That framework signified the importance of early childhood development as an area of priority for the GNWT, and it really represented a major collaborative partnership to provide direct focus on investments in programs and supports for families of young children here in the NWT. Since the release of that framework, there have been multiple action plans that have been drafted and implemented to continue that work, bridging back from 2013 to our current reality now. So through the framework, EC&E has supported a number of actions that assist with improving access to high quality early learning and childcare opportunities here in the NWT. Some of those include the territorial implementation of junior kindergarten for all 4-year-olds, which we just spoke about. Having our early childhood staff grant to increase the financial income of early childhood staff in licensed center-based programs to offer an incentive to attract new professionals into the profession of the early childhood workforce, of course. The early childhood scholarships, which help offset the costs for NWT students who are attending full-time diploma or degree programs in the field of early childhood development. We've increased the early childhood program funding to offset operating costs for licensed early learning and childcare programs. We have SKIP funding, which is supporting child inclusion and participation, which is a proposal-based funding mechanism to support children who are vulnerable, at risk, or who have specific developmental needs that may need additional supports, perhaps beyond what is readily available to them in their community, in their existing program. And the early childhood infrastructure funding, which is also application-based funding, typically of $500,000 for 2021, and $1 million beginning April 1st this month, 2021, which is meant to assist with the costs specifically of infrastructure-related repairs, retrofits, or new construction that supports the maintenance and creation of new licensed center-based childcare spaces in our communities. With that, Madam Chairperson, I'd like to pass things over to my colleague, Shelley Kapralian, who, as Minister Simpson noted, is our Director of Early Learning and Childcare, and she'll move you over to slide 7 and take you through some of the rest of the presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barnett-Eichmann. Absolutely, Ms. Kapralian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On slide 7, you'll see our federal agreement, which represents a significant investment from the federal government in the early learning and childcare sector in the NWT and across Canada. In June 2016, the ministers most responsible for childcare met, and officials worked towards establishing a multilateral early learning and childcare framework that was signed by provinces and territories and Canadian ministers. It set the foundation for governments to work toward a shared long-term vision for early learning and childcare in Canada. And the principles that are laid out in that framework are what are reflected in each of the provinces and territories' bilateral agreements and action plans based on the context of each jurisdiction. So for the NWT, that meant in 2017 through to 2021, we've had 4 years of funding at approximately $2.4 million in federal dollars flowing to the territory to support the actions we've outlined. There are a number of them, but I'll highlight a few. We've been able to enhance our operating subsidy to licensed programs, the daily rates that they receive for their spaces, funding to help open new childcare programs, and provide a number of professional development and post-secondary opportunities to help early childhood educators in their role. Moving to slide 8, please. On slide 8, there's a list of recent research and reviews that have been done. There's a body of research that demonstrates the benefits of quality, well-designed early learning and childcare programming for children, and it continues to grow. This is a highlight of some recent documents that have informed the work and will be considered when we're drafting the strategy for 2030. A few of them included here are the 2015 feasibility study of universal affordable daycare in the Northwest Territories, which I know this committee is very familiar with. The 2 national status reports on early learning and childcare in Canada from the Atkinson Centre and the Childcare Resource and Research Unit, which have some longitudinal study results. We also have a funding review that is underway right now and will be completed this month on our early childhood program operating subsidy, our early childhood scholarships, and our early childhood staff grant. And the findings from that review will inform the work that we identify in the strategy and on our ongoing actions to improve how we support licensed programs to operate in each community in NWT. And finally, we've noted the Imagining the Future of Early Childhood Education in the NWT event that was co-hosted by 3 centers in the territory, and which invited members of the public, parents, families, and early childhood educators to consider the sector in the NWT and how we can improve and work together and collaborate on our shared goals. There are additional details in the discussion paper if you would like to learn more about those. Next, we turn to slide 9. And slide 9 is the beginning of the discussion questions section of our presentation today. And the overall goal of the 2030 strategy is to incrementally increase access to high quality early learning and childcare programming for families and children from birth to 3 years of age. The investments that are required to increase access and affordability of programs is one aspect of it. We would also like to consider through the questions and discussion how we can better understand community needs across the territory to inform where the investments should go and the prioritization of the actions that we need to take as a territory. And we would also like to note that the incremental investment over time is how we will see progress towards meeting the mandate of advancing universal childcare in the territory. As has been previously noted by Shannon Barnett-Aikman, there are many indicators of high quality early learning environments, and we need to consider each element. So the questions have been structured in this presentation to try and hear your perspective as a committee and hear from Indigenous governments and licensed program operators and early childhood educators on their perspectives on each of the questions. So if we can move to the next slide, slide 10. This visual is meant to assist with framing the discussion about incrementally expanding the availability of high quality, accessible, and affordable early learning and childcare programs and services. And the questions are organized around each of these areas: qualified staff, inclusive and responsive programming that is community driven, where there is infrastructure available and where affordability has been addressed. And all of that with the understanding that we need to ensure that we are honoring the Indigenous worldviews, languages, and cultures of the NWT and the peoples of the NWT. Moving to slide 11. This is the beginning of the discussion questions. The first two are focused on the area of honoring Indigenous worldviews, languages, and cultures, and takes into account the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action 12 to develop culturally appropriate early childhood education programs for Aboriginal families, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to recognize Indigenous peoples' right to self-determination and autonomy or self-government in matters relating to internal and local affairs, and recognizing Indigenous peoples' right to establish and control their education systems and institutions. The discussion paper also notes and acknowledges the importance of supporting the 231 calls for justice identified in the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And we recognize the rights of Indigenous governments to have authority over early learning and childcare services in their communities, which is where our engagement and our meetings with Indigenous governments and engagement with community programs is very important. As the strategy is developed and implemented, it will be imperative for Indigenous worldviews, languages, and cultures to be deeply woven into the experiences for young children and their families. In each of the sections where of the paper and in this presentation, we also highlighted some actions that the department has taken and some investments to date to inform the discussion. And in this section, we note that the bilateral agreement and action plan has supported investments and development and distribution of cultural resources, including music and books in Indigenous languages, also professional learning opportunities, and a cultural resource grant that we provided to licensed programs to help support them in purchasing resources that they would deem appropriate for their programs in their communities. Slide 12, please. Slide 12 speaks to qualified early childhood educators, which is another component. In terms of the early learning and childcare sector, we know that we have about 220 early childhood educators working in programs across the North that have varying degrees of education, formal and informal. And we know that one way to address this is post-secondary education, and we also acknowledge that there have in the past been barriers to early childhood educators who are working in programs accessing post-secondary education, and for those that might be interested in entering the field for the first time. So for that reason, we've been offering professional learning opportunities to early childhood educators in licensed programs, where possible in partnership with community organizations and with our Department of Health and Social Services partner. And we've also supported the college, Aurora College, in delivery of their distance-based certificate program and face-to-face diploma program that is happening for the second cohort this year in Yellowknife. We offer early childhood scholarships for $5,000 for those students who are pursuing post-secondary education, and we have aimed to address the wage that early childhood educators receive through the Early Childhood Staff Grant to recognize the important role that they play. Slide 13, please. In terms of inclusive and responsive programming, these questions are intended to help us understand what the needs are from the different groups that we'll be meeting with, including Standing Committee today. So we've noted that inclusive and responsive early learning environments are important so that all children are welcomed as valued members of the community and supported to actively participate. And we also know that to help all children feel successful, inclusive early learning and childcare programs need to provide supports that respond to their specific needs and the needs of their families. That includes addressing qualified staff who have an understanding around early childhood development and how to meet needs of children, modifying physical environments to remove barriers and increase access, and to ensure that the appropriate learning materials and resources are in place in programs so that there's quality. The mandate of the Legislative Assembly includes a shift to an integrated service delivery approach, which is an across-government approach, and specific mandate items around early childhood, which will require governments, nonprofit organizations, agencies, and communities to work together collaboratively to co-create and provide services in a seamless way so that we meet the needs of children and families and ensure that the family's voice is heard and that children's needs are met. One example of current investment in this area that the department has is the Supporting Child Inclusion and Participation Annual Proposal-Based Funding, which is focused on vulnerable children and children with specific needs. Slide 14, please. This section has two questions related to community-driven programming in order to have an understanding of the needs of community. And here we would note again that while we don't operate programs, we do license, fund, inspect, and provide ongoing support in different ways, including professional learning, to Indigenous governments, nonprofit organizations, and individuals, family day home operators who would be interested in operating a licensed program. These questions are also intended to recognize that the concept that we have mentioned around the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. Some communities may not have a need for a licensed center-based program, and other options like a family day home or a parent and tot program might better meet the needs of children and families in that community. So again, flexibility is key in our mind to meeting the needs of families across the North. Current initiatives and investments in this area include our regional early childhood consultants. In each of the regional ECE offices, we have early childhood consultants that work with communities. They help identify, for example, infrastructure or space in a community with an interested party and help work to license them, provide support along the way with that process, identify funding that's available. They visit the programs and provide training and support to staff as needed, and do their best to be responsive to the needs of the community program that's operating. Again, we also provide funding in different ways, including startup funding for licensed programs, and we have our inclusion funding through the SKIP funding. Slide 15, please. This slide speaks to the barrier that we have heard is the case in some communities where infrastructure is the reason why a childcare program is not in place. And that led to the creation of an infrastructure fund, as was noted earlier in the presentation, that has grown and is intended to meet the needs of renovations and retrofits to existing space or new construction where needed, so that we have appropriate early learning environments that are safe for children. Slide 16. These three questions are related to affordability, another key component in advancing towards universal childcare. According to the 2015 feasibility study of universal affordable daycare in the Northwest Territories, and more recently the Statistics Canada survey completed in 2019 on early learning and childcare arrangements, parents report difficulty finding and paying for childcare. So both the access and the affordability piece were noted in that Stats Canada survey. There is a wide discrepancy of fees charged to parents in the NWT, from free all the way up to over $1,000 a month for families, depending on the type of care that they require and the community that they live in. While we have an income assistance program and student financial assistance program that provide funding to some families, depending on their eligibility and their needs, we recognize that for some families that live in certain communities, the cost is quite high. Slide 17, please. And then these are some general questions to help us get a sense of prioritization. So understanding that we've covered questions in the areas of qualified staff, inclusive and responsive programming, community-driven programming, infrastructure, and affordability. These questions are intended to help us get a sense of where our licensed program staff, Indigenous governments, and standing committee would suggest the prioritization should be based on the needs in communities. And then where there are things that the GNWT and our department specifically are doing things well, where things need to continue to happen and we shouldn't take away from that work, what are those areas? And then what can we do differently so that we are improving and better meeting the needs? Now Madam Chair, pass the presentation back to Shannon so that she can conclude the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carillion. Ms. Barnett-Eichmann?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to, in conclusion, as Shelley said, moving to slide 18, this slide does overview the next steps that we see that will follow on after our engagements. This discussion today, of course, will serve as the basis for our drafting of the 2030 Early Learning and Childcare Strategy, as I said earlier. Expanding the availability and affordability of early learning programs is one way to support families with young children here in the NWT, and we're looking forward to the dialogue and the feedback we receive from you and from other partners in our system to help inform that strategy. As a follow-up to our discussions, EC&E will summarize the feedback and comments to create a What We Heard document that will be shared with Standing Committee on Social Development. It will also go to our Indigenous governments as well as our licensed early learning and child care programs. And our target for that is in summer 2021, this coming year. And then, of course, our goal is to have the 2030 Early Learning and Childcare Strategy be finalized within the 21-22 fiscal year. So thank you, Madam Chairperson, and thank you to the committee members. At this point, that does conclude our presentation, and we're certainly looking forward to your dialogue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barnett-Eichmann, and thank you as well to Ms. Carillion as well for the presentation. To start us off with questions and comments from committee, I'm going to turn the floor over to MLA Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for everyone presenting today. My first question is in regards to the questions being asked, and the recent documents coming out of EC seem to not include the school boards in any of this. And I know the 2015 strategy for universal childcare, one of the recommendations was that the minister direct school boards to provide before and after school services for students 4 and up. And I know a lot of the school boards and some of the teachers have said, we're not daycares and we shouldn't be necessarily crossing those. But when I look at the infrastructure problem, it seems schools are the solution. They're best utilized. So I guess in regards to that specific recommendation that the minister direct the school board to provide aftercare services, where is the department's current thinking on that? It seems that to me is one of the big questions to be decided. It's what role our school boards will play going forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA Johnson. Minister Simpson?
Thank you. I will hand this off to perhaps the Deputy Minister for a response, but there are a couple of schools of thoughts about having childcare in schools. We do have some schools with low utilization that could, and we could use some of that space for full-time childcare. Although there have been concerns, even when junior kindergarten was introduced, that including 4-year-olds in the schools was inappropriate. So that's something that is always being discussed. For how the school boards are being engaged, I can ask the Deputy Minister to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister Mueller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. So we are planning on engaging all of the education bodies. In fact, the Minister will be speaking with education leaders in the upcoming April 27th Education Leaders Meeting. And this presentation, along with the discussion paper, will be shared with them as well, too. So they will have an opportunity because, as the member has suggested, they have a vested interest with their early learning programs for 4- and 5-year-old children. As far as the engagement with licensed centers have really had to adapt since 2017 to focus in on 0 to 3-year-olds, where that need has always been and continues to be throughout the territory when 4- and 5-year-olds, because the majority of them have now gone into the early learning and childcare programs at the school, or JKK, there's still quite a need for 0 to 3-year-old licensed childcare. And so we're really looking through all of our initiatives of how do we help support communities and those programs expand and offer those spaces to families in need, and then to work with each of the communities, especially those that don't have right now any licensed programs, to figure out what really would best meet their needs. And so that might look very different from community to community, depending on their need. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. Emily Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're suggesting we direct the school boards to weigh into the 0 and 3, which, given the regulations, are rather stringent, and I recognize there's safety concerns and having too many infants and not proper supervision. I don't think school boards should have a role in the 0 to 3, but I would encourage the minister when engaging with the school boards. It's not so much engaging. My sense would be that school boards do not want to provide childcare for ages 4 to 12 in their schools. They were rather resistant to having junior kindergarten put on them. Their boards don't, provide daycare. And I think if we want universal childcare, and we are going to find an affordable path, the minister has to, probably make it a semi-unpopular decision. So I would encourage the minister to go into the consultation with school boards. You're going to have to take a larger role in providing childcare for ages 4 to 12. What are your concerns? But I think some direction needs to be given and, built into the strategy. So I guess to form a question out of that is the minister of the view that, kind of giving that direction if school boards don't want it is just not a political decision we can kind of make at this time? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily Johnson. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. And I think the only types of decisions ministers of education can make are unpopular ones. But I'll bring this to the table and have the conversation. Our relationship with school boards is very collaborative, and it's not one where you want to use a stick. You want to work together, and everyone has a vested interest in this. So I will bring it to them, and there's also has to be an acknowledgement that it's different everywhere. There are some places that need this, there are some places that don't, and it's how can we design a system where specific needs are met without having necessarily implementing broad strokes when that might not be necessary. So I will have the conversation, and I do appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Simpson. Emily Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have some technological issues with my tablet computer, so I apologize if I'm showing up sideways on your screen. I'm glad to hear the minister acknowledge that that it's not a cookie cutter approach, and that each community is going to need to look at its own solutions and incorporate the wants of the communities in that. I don't really have much in the form of questions regarding this subject, but while I have the minister and ECE here, I just want to relay what I've been hearing about education, and really I've been long aware as a child of a teacher that the first 5 years are the most important. And really, I'm hearing from educators a big issue in the North is just the lack of children being read to. So while I know this isn't specific about these childcare spaces that you're trying to make available before school, could maybe the minister speak a little bit to why or to how the department is trying to increase that literacy and reading in the homes, including adult literacy that would then flow down to children. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Minister Simpson.
Thank you, and I can ask the Deputy Minister to respond to the adult literacy part, and there are partnerships that we have with organizations who help promote that and reading in the home. But one of our issues in the territory is that a number of children don't get that enriched environment at a young age, and that is why these early learning and childcare centers are important. So if they're not being read to at home, how do we provide them with not just physical spaces to go, but physical spaces where you're going to get some quality education as well. Understanding that education for a 1-year-old is different than education for a 5-year-old, and acknowledging that. But perhaps the Deputy Minister can speak to some of the other initiatives encouraging literacy at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. So ECE has a long-standing, and I would suggest very positive relationship with the NWT Literacy Council. They do such great work in promoting family literacy and in also, trying to meet the needs across all of our lives in promoting literacy. So we do have a number of initiatives with them, including promoting literacy with adults, but family literacy as well at the community level. And something that we're working on that I think is very exciting, that has a literacy component to it for the 0 to 3 early learning and childcare, is the development of a draft early learning framework that we've been working on for a couple of years now, and that we hope to pilot with volunteer family day homes and with licensed centers, and really essentially anybody who's interested in this. And that framework lays out kind of the basis of what a high quality early learning environment would be like for children from 0 on. And of course, part of that is the language, social, and literacy skill development of a child that's developmentally appropriate. And then the last thing I just want to share is that we've also had some movement forward in promoting literacy, both in English, French, and in Indigenous languages through our bilateral agreement with the federal government over the years. We were able to invest funds in the development of age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate resources for children, from children's books for a very young age all the way up in various languages, and what I would suggest are culturally appropriate as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. MLA Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate those answers. And anytime I think that we can give resources for free around education, I'm in full support of that. You have an ally here on that. I'm going to put the Minister a little bit on the spot here. I had a constituent or resident that raised to me the fact that there is no policy within the Department of Education, Culture and Employment that students be able to read. And this constituent was concerned about the coping strategies of our students rather than actually ensuring that they have the skill set. So I'm going to ask, will the Minister and his staff to commit to actually updating the policy so it commits to that students in the Northwest Territories have the ability to read by a reasonable age? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Knockleby. Minister?
Thank you. So in the Northwest Territories, there are students who go on to become surgeons, and there's others who it takes them a while to work up to their appropriate grade level, and we know that some people never reach that. And I'm not sure if it's appropriate to say that children must read by this age, because not everyone comes from the same place. Not everyone has the same starting place, and there's students who have specialized lesson plans that try to help them get to that place, but perhaps I can ask the Deputy Minister to provide some more information about that, but I'll have to make this a no. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. So, this is really tied in with trained early learning and childcare staff. So for, the number of children, just under, 2,000 children right now in licensed spaces alone, all of the research points out that the higher the quality of and certification of the early learning childcare instructors and programs, whether it be in family day homes or whether it be in centers, there is an impact then on the kind of rich and developmentally appropriate activities that children are doing at all ages. And so that is one of our strategies, is to ensure that there's ongoing, very meaningful professional development and training for all of our licensed early childhood staff, as well as new opportunities we're looking at to get people certified, at least in the certificate or diploma, and perhaps beyond. As far as in our actual JK-12 system, every single one of the goals, it doesn't matter what curriculum, has literacy built in. and the goal of developing children's vocabulary, sometimes specific to subject areas, their social skill and communication skills with each other and those around them. And so this is something that is a goal of our school system. You know, and the ideal age, a lot of research around this suggests that if a child is proficient in reading, writing, and communicating at the end of grade 3 at 8 years old, then chances are they're going to have a better success academically for the remainder of their school years. And I can say that that is certainly a commitment of our school system and of all the educators I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. MLA Norn. MLA Norn, are you able to hear me okay? It appears that perhaps there are some technical difficulties happening. I'll pass it off to MLA O'Reilly. MLA O'Reilly, are you muted?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. 2 clicks to make. On slide 8, the 2015 feasibility study is found, or it's mentioned, and from the news coverage that I've seen of the federal budget, and I guess even the Liberal Policy Convention on the weekend, there seems to be a lot of interest in childcare, early learning, and I think we need to have a case ready to go as to how much it would actually cost us to implement universal childcare in the Northwest Territories. So my question to the minister is, are there any plans to update this 2015 feasibility study? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Minister?
Thank you. So part of the work to create the 2030 early learning and childcare strategy is to figure out what universal childcare could look like in the Northwest Territories and what that would cost. So that's exactly what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. MLA O'Reilly.
Thanks. Yeah, Madam Chair, I appreciate that because I've looked at this study several times since it was done. I think it was an excellent piece of work. I understand that we're going to go through basically almost like a needs survey, gap analysis, and doing some of the consultation work that needs to be done. But I do really want to urge the minister to get ourselves ready so that if the feds do make further announcements around potential funding or moves in terms of universal childcare, we're ready with a case to go to Ottawa right away. And that's what updating this 2015 feasibility study will do. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Minister, do you have a comment?
Sure. The federal government has been making some bold statements about early learning and childcare and the move to a universal childcare system, and so we are going to be ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Let's go back to MLA Norn and see if we can get his audio up. MLA Norn? It appears as though we're still having some technical difficulties coming from MLA Norn. Are there any additional comments or questions from any members? Seeing and hearing none. Minister, let's pass it back to yourself for your second presentation, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to committee And I'll just say one thing about the early learning and childcare strategy. I think this is a chance to do some great things and have some long-lasting impacts on the Northwest Territories. So I will keep committee updated as we continue this work, and hopefully we see some great things by the end of this assembly. We will now move on to the presentation on curriculum renewal. Joining Ms. Barnett Aikman to present to committee is Jessica Brace, Director of Curriculum Development and Student Assessment. So through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to hand it to Ms. Barnett Aikman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let's pass it off to Ms. Barnett Aikman. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Thank you, Minister. So we start with the first slide.
Sorry, Ms. Barnett, we're just going to take 1 minute here just to be able to open up the next slide deck and make sure that that's up and loaded so people can see it and follow along publicly. So if we just take a 1 minute breather, we should be good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister and Ms. Barnett Aikman. We're all set. We just wanted to make sure that the public had the same opportunity to see the slides. And so anytime you're ready, I'll pass the floor back over to yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's great. Okay, so our NWT JK-12 curriculum is out of date and in need of renewal, of course. We do regularly review our curriculum and resources to make sure they're aligned with our priorities and values for education here in the NWT. That's part of our ongoing process. And exploring what options are available is a normal part of renewing and reviewing curriculum in any jurisdiction. So to that, EC&E has conducted research to explore how other provinces and territories approach curriculum. And the jurisdictions we've looked into are the other Western Canadian provinces, including British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and the Yukon. I would flag that you're going to hear us reference the curriculum from these different provinces throughout the presentation. And when we are referencing Alberta, I do want to clarify that we, at the time the research was done, we did not have access to the new kindergarten to grade 6 Alberta curriculum. So the research that is informed through that, the outcomes of our discussion paper that are informed by that research were grounded in the existing Alberta curriculum that we are currently using in our schools. And my colleague, Jessica Brace, will dig into this a little bit further in the presentation. But certainly we do have a plan now that we've seen and can access the new kindergarten to grade 6 curriculum from Alberta. We do have a plan to apply the same methodologies and dig into the research of how that new curriculum is aligned to our values and priorities here as well, to make sure we have that same consistency and that we're talking apples to apples, so to speak. Of course, I'm sure you're all aware that we do have a long-standing and close relationship with Alberta Education in the area of curriculum and also large-scale student assessment tools. And also, of course, we all know that Alberta Edge is currently in the process of changing their curriculum for every subject from grade kindergarten to grade 12. So for us here in the NWT, where we already have such regular and long-standing use of that curriculum in different grades and different subjects, that's going to mean a change for us away from what we're currently using for the most part anyway, regardless of whether we look into continuing to move in the same direction Alberta does and continue to partner in using their curriculum, or if we seek to move into accessing the curriculum of another jurisdiction. For us, the development of curriculum and the related programs we have here in the NWT, our priority is that they meet the needs and the interests of our NWT students and communities. And of course, that means that they're really grounded in the Indigenous worldviews and reflect the identities of our Northern culture, our Northern children, and supporting them in becoming NWT capable people in ways that are relevant for them. So this presentation really provides an overview of the NWT JK-12 curriculum renewal discussion paper, which outlines our exploration of curriculum renewal here at home. It provides a common starting place for us to engage in conversation together, where hopefully, again, you're able to ask questions and share concerns and comments about your thinking around curriculum renewal for our schools here in the Territory. And when we move to slide 2, please. This slide obviously provides a presentation outline, and it really reflects the way the information in the discussion paper is laid out, in that the following sections are present, in that they are the understanding JK-12 curriculum, researching the curriculum of the Western Canadian provinces, and as I said, that really summarizes that research that we undertook to see the alignment between the curriculum in those other jurisdictions and our goals here at home in the NWT. The timeline, there's a slide there that speaks to the proposed timeline for a decision about curriculum and implementation. And as you saw with the early learning and childcare slide deck, we have included some discussion points. The difference here, maybe that would be relevant to flag, is that these are big question marks that we still continue to have, that we know, that we flagged that we need to dig into as part of the ongoing work towards looking at what might be the best next steps in considering a new approach to NWT curriculum here. They're question marks that we would need to answer regardless of which jurisdictional partner we opt to move forward with. And I hope that they will elicit some ongoing input from yourselves, either to expand on the points that we've captured in those particular slides, or possibly even spark some additional points that perhaps we haven't captured and that you feel would be relevant for us to put some attention to moving forward as well. Moving to slide 3, please. So understanding curriculum. The overall goal of our NWT education system, as you've heard us say before, is that to develop an NWT capable person. And a capable person is one who demonstrates integrity in relationships that honor themselves, their relationships with others, the land, and for those who ascribe to it, the spiritual world. And it's through those relationships that a capable person can grow and develop physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to be the best version of themselves they can be. Of course, under the Ed Act, our Minister of Education is responsible for the establishment and approval of the curriculum for all subject areas that we use from junior kindergarten through to grade 12. Once those are approved, Curriculum documents end up being shared with our education bodies, of course. They're added to the list of NWT approved curriculum, and we begin to dig into some of the more operational natures of how we bridge what a curriculum is to what that means for student learning in the classroom, in our schools, and in our communities. Curriculum really is the document that sets out the concepts, the attitudes, the skills that students are expected to be able to demonstrate at various stages of their learning during the school year. Over time, curriculum design has shifted away from something called outcomes-based learning, where students are literally learning outcomes, and has moved towards something called competencies. Perhaps the easiest way to distinguish this is that outcomes emphasize the content as well as some skills that are required of students, whereas competencies are more holistic and emphasize the knowledge, the skills, attitudes, and values of a capable person that a student is able to draw on and apply within any variety of contexts, in any variety of settings, as they grow and develop into adulthood. So the renewal of our NWT JK-12 curriculum really will include a transition towards a more competencies-based curriculum and having teaching practices and instruction that's more in line with those modern approaches to research and theory. So with your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to pass the floor over to my colleague, Jessica Brace. As the Minister mentioned earlier, she's our Director of Curriculum Development and Student Assessment, and she's going to walk us through the next few slides.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barnetta Aikman. I will pass the floor over to Ms. Brace. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Shannon. As Shannon was mentioning, a small jurisdiction like the NWT developing curriculum for all subject areas and all grades, as well as the accompanying assessment tools, is a really large undertaking, and it's really beyond the human and financial resources available to the NWT. As a result, the NWT for years has taken a create, adapt, and adopt approach to curriculum development. This means where possible, we do wherever we can, we'll create our own curriculum, but we also rely on adopting or adapting curriculum from other provinces for use in the NWT. In terms of creation, the NWT has had the opportunity to create some really great curricula along with teacher guides and resources here in the NWT. Those include one of the newest out the gate and approved is our JK-12 Our Languages, Indigenous Languages curriculum, which was just approved this school year and is being implemented in schools across the north. We have a draft grades 4 to 9 health and wellness curriculum that's currently being piloted in schools across the north. Junior kindergarten curriculum was released in 2017. Our Northern Studies 10 program was released in 2015. Experiential Science 10, 20, and 30 was developed in 2006. And there are others as well. These are really exciting opportunities for us to develop programs or curriculum in-house in the NWT. We also have 2 foundational curriculums in the north, Inikatagit, used up in the Beaufort Delta region, and the Dene Kadai, which were created in the NWT. Along with those curricula, we have a wide variety of locally developed courses that education bodies, and a lot of them in partnership with Indigenous governments, have created and have been an avenue for our governments and our communities to bring local learning into the classroom. So those are the opportunities we've had to create our own curriculum. And in some cases, we'll also adapt a curriculum from another jurisdiction, which is an opportunity where we will take the base of a curriculum from a province, and we'll just use local context within that. So one of the examples that we have right now is that our Northwest Territories Social Studies curriculum from grades 1 through 5 was actually adapted from Manitoba. So we took the Manitoba curriculum and then we brought in the NWT specific context within that. In terms of adopting, there are other NWT curriculum that we've actually adopted without making any changes at all to the curriculum. These are examples right now. We have our Saskatchewan fine arts curriculum. We've adopted it specifically from grades 1 through grade 9, as is from Saskatchewan, without any NWT changes. We do that as well with our math curriculum from grades 1 through 9, which is adopted from Alberta. And for most people, you're aware, our high school curriculum in its entirety is adopted from Alberta for grades 10, 11, and 12. So at this time, we understand that our NWT schools have access to good curriculum, but it's quite dated, and some of the assessment tools that accompany those are as well. So we lack the ability to modernize the curriculum at the scale and the pace required to create a new curriculum made in the NWT for all JK to 12 subject areas. It's just not feasible for us to take on that responsibility at this time. So we'll likely need to continue to keep that create, adapt, and adopt approach to curriculum going forward. If I can ask you to move to slide 5, please. So in terms of understanding curriculum, one of the biggest pieces that we know and we want folks to understand is that curriculum must be reflective of the cultures, languages, and identities in the NWT. We just understand that if it's reflective of our community and our schools, it's going to be more impactful and more relatable to our students and our families. We also recognize that curriculum needs to be competency-based. This means, and Shannon alluded to this a bit already, it means that it engages student interests, ownership, and involvement in their education. It's not just being taught to them, it's being taught with them. It needs to be relevant to their lives, and it has to meet the needs of the students themselves and their families. Competency-based education will introduce new modern concepts, the skills, attitudes, and ideas that support NWT students to be successful throughout their lives and to become capable NWT people. It also emphasizes critical thinking and transferable skills as opposed to those basic memorization of facts and content. So it takes the learning a little bit deeper. The expectation is that it's not simple. It's actually quite complex, and that students are taken into deeper learning opportunities. We already do have some competency-based curriculum in the NWT. I think we're very proud to know that our junior kindergarten curriculum is a competency-based, play-based curriculum. The new JK to 12 Our Languages curriculum is based on competencies as well. And the grades 4 to 9 health curriculum that's in pilot is based on competencies. We are also currently developing a Northern Studies 20 course, which is competency-based, which will be competency-based as well. And if you can move to slide 6, please. So as Shannon mentioned, we do have a long-standing relationship with Alberta Education. So when Alberta makes changes to their curriculum, it's important for us to be aware of what's happening. And we've tried very hard to stay in close contact with them. Alberta has been preparing to update their own curriculum since 2009, so it's not a short process that they've been in. And we've been involved in that process since that time. When we first started in 2009, right up until 2018, we were very involved in the development of their new draft curriculum. Our teams traveled to Alberta often, and we had representatives from the school system, from the superintendents, right through to our leadership here at ECE involved in those meetings. And up until 2018, we were, very happy with the development of the curriculum in terms of where they were going with competencies and where they were going with Indigenous perspectives being involved in their curriculum. However, there seems to have been a shift, and we haven't been as involved in their curriculum development to date. So the new draft that was released just on March 30th this year is not something that the NWT had involvement in the creation of. We're seeing it new as the rest of that province is as well. The intent that we understand from Alberta Education is that they will be releasing the curriculum to be used in a pilot stage for a voluntary pilot for schools in the fall of 2021. So we're trying to stay as involved as possible with their process so that we can understand where they are in their developments. We do know, as Shannon mentioned, that if Alberta makes a major shift like this, it's going to require the NWT to change no matter what. So we're in a situation where we're going to need to renew the curriculum one way or another. So as was mentioned, ECE has undertaken work to review the curriculum of all 4 Western Canadian provinces, including Alberta, in order to determine the degree to which they align with the NWT's goals of moving to a competency-based curriculum. This work that was done over a couple of years was known as curriculum options, and the following slides will outline what research was undertaken and what ECE has since learned from that research. So if I can ask you to move to slide 7, please. Thank you. In 2019, Malatest, a research company located in Alberta, was hired to research and evaluate the junior kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum for the Western provinces in Canada for alignment to NWT education priorities and goals. The Western Canadian provinces were selected because of their demographics that require Indigenous representation in their curriculum. So we understand that in Canada, the Western provinces really do have a higher population of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize that by virtue of that, the need for Indigenous representation and perspectives and worldview to be included in curriculum is likely more given more priority. We also recognize that geographic proximity was really important to the process for us. The ability to access the jurisdiction for professional development for teachers and training, and having, those, if they have opportunities, we would like to be able to participate in them when and if they're available. So at the time of the research, we wanted to make sure that we had that lens as well. So the Western provinces were the ones that were obviously closest in proximity. And finally, the NWT has had a longstanding relationship with something called the Western Northern Canadian Protocol, which was developed as a collaborative piece of work with the Western Canadian provinces and the territories for all of the K-12 curriculum work. Because of this, this protocol is no longer in place, but we understand that a number of the Western provinces still use curriculum that was developed with this protocol when this protocol was in place. And so there's similarities there. And then if there's going to be a change of curriculum going with a province within the Western provinces, would likely be still aligned in that way. So ECD conducted research that led the development of an options paper to provide the options to improve the outcomes of NWT JK to 12 students with 3 goals. One of them was to examine the approaches taken by Western Canadian provinces to offer student competency-based curriculum, student assessment, inclusion and reflection of Indigenous perspectives, and some other key parts of the education system. Determining the relative alignment of each of the jurisdictions examined with NWT priorities and goals based on the data provided by this scan, as well as the data analysis conducted by a range of ECE staff. So not only was the research company Malatest asked to do the scan, the staff within the Department of Education was asked to review the scans for verification. And one of the final piece of that work was to describe some of the practical implications, some of the risks and opportunities of changing or not changing in terms of the curriculum. One of the notes that we would say is that when the research was conducted, costing and timelines and implementation planning was out of scope, and that wasn't actually part of the work that was done. We wanted to make sure that, we were focusing really on what those priorities were first before bringing in costing, timelines, and implementation. We can move to slide 8, please. Thank you. So when Malatest was hired, the first thing they did is they sampled curriculum and policy documents over a range of different subject areas and different grades for these 4 provinces. And they used a comprehensive collection of 34 NWT education priorities to rank and to review the data that they were looking at. The curriculum or the criteria those 35 education priorities represented a comprehensive collection of educational priorities from the NWT that was identified from a range of public engagement processes starting in 2010 to 2019 across the NWT. So these 34 priorities really did come from past engagements that we've had, including the Aboriginal Student Achievement Education Forums, the Education Innovation and Education Renewal and Innovation Roundtables, as well as the Early Childhood Roundtables, and other documents and opportunities where the public has voiced their opinion on what they wanted to see in education for the NWT. So from that research, 4 main themes came forward of what we wanted to make sure was in a curriculum that would show alignment for the NWT. The first theme that came forward fairly loud and clear was the development of the need for a competency-based curriculum. Being and becoming an NWT capable person is the core concept upon which any new NWT curriculum is developed. Competencies are overarching and interrelated organizers that help a person both know and do. They include but are more than just skills and values, and put less value on facts and skills taught out of context. What students need to know and do in this kind of curriculum includes knowing how to make choices and how to use their resources in changing situations. Competencies allow a capable person to navigate in the bush as well as to deal with a new problem in school or a work situation. A competency-based approach to curriculum is now almost universal in education systems today. And because of that trend across the globe, we found that this was really something we wanted to make sure that the NWT was doing as well, especially at looking at renewing a new modern curriculum. The second theme that came forward loud and clear was the need to include Indigenous perspectives. So since the beginning of the territorial government's responsibility for education in the NWT, which started in 1967, there have been a consistent vision that NWT JK-12 curriculum and teaching and student resources used in any of the NWT schools needed to reflect the Indigenous peoples of this place. Indigenous perspectives on learning, doing, and being, as well as Indigenous content visible in curriculum and learning materials, and intentional efforts towards school community Indigenous government relationship building and reconciliation are key aspects to education in the NWT. And this was certainly one of the things that we've looked at throughout all of the curriculum in a very intense way. The third theme was around inclusive schooling. Inclusive schooling is a foundational part of the NWT education system. We need to make sure that we're supporting access to education for all JK, all JK children and youth, including diverse learners, and particularly students with complex needs and exceptionalities, which is important to our NWT education system. In the NWT, as most of you are aware, a large percentage of the JK-12 student population requires additional supports and interventions. Funding and support approaches must adequately and appropriately meet the territory's needs. And then the fourth one is the large-scale student assessment tools. So we all understand that for public assurance purposes, education systems must have the means to monitor the degree to which JK-12 students are learning what they expected to learn. The NWT is keenly aware that with the small student numbers, territorial developed standardized testing will always be a challenge. It's not something that we can create in-house, and we need to rely on large-scale assessments from other jurisdictions. All right, moving to slide 9, please. Slide 9, I think it's slide 9 has the analysis, there it is. Slide 9 identifies the different analysis that was done for curriculum with this research. We ranked the provinces against the major themes outlined previously in order to determine, which of the JK-12 curriculum was compatible with NWT needs. So all of the 4 themes that we just discussed were weighted and ranked. And as you can see from that slide, British Columbia was the most closely aligned to the NWT's priority in all 4 areas. As Ms. Barnett-Aikman mentioned earlier, it is important to note that Alberta curriculum, the Alberta curriculum that was evaluated for this scan was the current curriculum that Alberta is using in their schools right now. It is not, it's not related to the new draft JK or K-6 curriculum that was just released a couple weeks ago. So that chart there, and like it was mentioned, we will be doing similar research on that new draft to see where it fits in this in these research findings as well. It's just that work is undergoing right now. So what we did find out from that scan, and that was reaffirmed by members of the Department of Education here, was that in Theme 1, our competency-based education, BC had implemented a systemically renewed JK-12 curriculum over the past 4 years, which included assessment tools and approaches. So we found that they were the only curriculum that was completely competency-based. In terms of Indigenous perspectives, BC was also consistently the strongest of the 5 jurisdictions examined. Partnerships in the development of curriculum also included their First Nations Education Steering Committee, as most people know as FNESC, and the BC Teachers Federation, which was very strong. So that commitment to Indigenous perspectives was very strong and reflected in the materials and the assessment tools of that curriculum. In terms of inclusive schooling, the third theme, we found that the scan results and some conversations with ministry personnel showed that in the area of inclusive learning, it was the highest alignment again with the NWT with BC. And we are in fact already using some of the inclusive schooling materials from British Columbia in our inclusive schooling program right now. In terms of BC's programming in the area of large-scale student assessments, we saw that they would provide student achievement data at grades 4 and grade 7 in reading, writing, and numeracy, and they also provided data at grade 10 and 12 for literacy and numeracy. So those are the results of the research findings to date. As we move to slide 10, I'd like to pass the floor back to my colleague, Ms. Barnett-Aikman. Please, thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brace. Ms. Barnett-Aikman, we'll pass the floor back to yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So here we start to give you a sense of the timeline we're looking at. EC&E is in the process of initiating our formal consultation and engagement process right now with our Indigenous government partners, and also to engage with other key educational partners during the spring of 2021. And we've got that slated to take place between now in April through till mid-June, roughly. The public will have the opportunity to provide feedback and comment on our JK-12 curriculum renewal through an online form on the ECE website, and there will be communications and public messaging around that to draw the public's attention to it. Once consultation and engagement are complete, then we will draft a What We Heard report again, summarizing the information and the questions and the concerns that are brought forward, and make sure everyone, standing committee members here and others who we've engaged with, receive a copy of that and are able to provide final feedback on making sure we've captured really what we've heard. Along with the internal research and investigation, the What We Heard report will inform the decision about the NWT JK-12 curriculum and any future partnerships that we may be looking at. As I mentioned earlier, the new Alberta K-6 curriculum will be reviewed by Malatest, who is the research company who conducted the original set of research, and the review will be completed before a decision is made. Our target completion date for that is the end of July, midsummer. And that, of course, is subject to the availability of the research company Malatest, but right now that's our target. We do anticipate that we'll have a decision around the JK-12 curriculum in August, end of August, hopefully, by the minister. And then, of course, what we will quickly need to pivot into once we've hit that point is planning for implementation, communications planning, and teacher training. And that, of course, is where we will start to engage with subject advisory groups, and a different kind of consultation and engagement will begin with our practitioners and our educators at the regional authority levels and across the department. And that will span the upcoming school year of 21-22, with a hopeful rollout of whatever that initial implementation of a new curriculum would be, whether that's a phased approach or whatever that looks like for the 22-23 school year. If we could move please to slide 11. Where we end up now in our presentation is really giving you a sense of those discussion points that I referenced at the beginning of the deck, at the beginning of the presentation. And as I said, these are really intended to flag to us the questions that we still have outstanding, the things we know we need answers to and able to inform a sound decision. And also, as I mentioned, I'm hopeful that they will spur on for you additional perspectives and inputs and feedback that comes through your lens that will help us move forward towards making a decision. So building on the research that's been done to date, we do have additional questions. And although the preliminary research, as you saw through the slide with the various flags, does point to a strong alignment with BC, as you've also heard us say, we need to go back and do a little bit more around the new Alberta kindergarten to grade 6 curriculum that we have access to now, and making sure that we've really done our due diligence there, comparing apples to apples. It is a large undertaking, and it does require the input of our Indigenous government leaders, our education bodies, and of course the Northwest Territories Teachers Association, and those are our primary focal points right now in terms of our engagement and consultation. If you could move, please, to slide 12. So we do need to understand clearly how and if a new curriculum can be adapted to reflect our local cultures and context here of the NWT. And again, you will have heard this woven through the presentation so far. That adaptation, adoption approach, we really will need to land that. So what are the opportunities within another jurisdiction's curriculum that we can see that best alignment, that best fit alignment with? These are questions that we need to answer. And so I'm hopeful that they may, as I said, flag to you additional points for consideration from your perspective. If we could move to slide 13, please. The second area where we have flagged is around student assessment tools and resources. So we do need to dig in a little bit to the implications and the costs related to accessing a new jurisdiction's or whatever Alberta's version of the next iteration of their curriculum, whatever those large-scale assessments are going to look like. Classroom assessments, what those might look like, and then the teaching resources component. With Alberta, will they stay with what they've already got in place with the Alberta achievement tests, or will they move to something different? With British Columbia or a different jurisdiction, what do those look like? Ms. Brace did speak a little bit to that previously, a few slides back, but that's something we really need to dig into a bit more. So are these the right questions, really? We would float out to yourselves, and are there others you feel that we need to ask? Moving to slide 14, please. So student information systems. The student information systems collect, house, and manage the student information data that we have, our educational data that we have around our students, their demographics, their performance. ECE uses two different student information systems currently, and what we will need to understand is if either of those systems are going to need to change based on a new curriculum from a new jurisdiction, and if so, what are the implications for us, either in terms of the ability to continue using our existing information systems or whether this necessitates a change to something different. And then, of course, assuming that it did, or if it did necessitate a change, then there are those follow-on subset questions of what costs are involved, what capacity will be required, what immediate impacts will we see, but also what are the downstream impacts that we'll need to take into consideration, again, both in terms of costing, in terms of human resources, and in terms of capacity. Moving to slide 15, please. The next area is in student online and distance learning. We need to understand what online or distance education platforms and programs may be offered by a new jurisdiction, as well, again, what may continue to be offered ongoing within Alberta, should we choose to stay with the Alberta's new curriculum, and ultimately whether those programs can be accessed by the NWT. We need to have a sense of whether any changes that we look into moving forward with curriculum will require consideration through our own homegrown Northern Distance Learning program. Are there impacts there? Does the jurisdiction offer a comparable approach? And ultimately, what are the impacts, again, both on our current students, but also on future students? Moving to slide 16, please. School staff professional development. So recognizing that a change will happen regardless by virtue of the fact that Alberta is changing their curriculum regardless, we know that there is going to be a need for ongoing, immediate and ongoing staff professional training in servicing and development. So having accessible, strong supports available for our frontline staff is essential. It's an absolute requirement, regardless of what our go-forward planning is going to be. So what access would our school staff have to available PD supports? And as you heard Ms. Brace reference earlier, will the jurisdiction that we may consider moving to already have avenues to support that we can move into accessing through them or borrowing and adapting into our current reality? Or will those need to be things that we are developing here on site from scratch? So those are considerations. What degree of support will our school staff expect and require? And very likely that will be informed by what level of difference we see between what they're using now as current curriculum here in the NWT and whatever it is that we will move to. And of course, as always, what are the costs associated with that? With additional staff professional development, regardless of whether it involves travel or not, there is an in-house cost, and we need to identify those. And moving to slide 17, please. The last discussion point that we framed here is around the learning management system. So our learning management system is the software designed specifically for teaching and training purposes. We need to understand what learning management systems are being used in whatever jurisdiction we may be proposing to move to, and whether any changes are required compared to what we're using here in-house. Not unsimilar to what we were discussing when we were considered student information systems. So would the system be compatible? Are there costs associated with using a different learning management system? And then again, building all of that into informing a decision and then moving into whatever the implementation and capacity planning is beyond that. And finally, please, if we could move to slide 18. So in summary, in addition to the preliminary research, what you will have taking away from this presentation is that more discussion and exploration is needed before we're ready to make a decision. This is a significant shift. We want to make sure we have an opportunity, a really strong, wonderful opportunity to make sure that the curriculum we're moving to use here in the NWT is absolutely grounded in what's best for our Northern children. And so this scope of project really requires the input of our education partners, the Indigenous governments, yourselves, the education bodies, and the NWTTA. So really, this is the point in the afternoon where, again, we would just encourage you and invite you, please, to bring forward your questions, to flag your concerns and your comments, and we will really take that away and work with that and use it to inform our next steps in this project. The one last thing I would flag is that the email address you see on this last slide, nwtcurriculum_renewal@gov.nt.ca, is the email address that has been and will continue to be shared with all of our partners and stakeholder groups who we engage with. As well, it is the email address that is being shared publicly for anyone who wishes to provide feedback and input into this process. And certainly, although the committee will potentially share additional comments and feedback in writing with us, which we invite you to do and look forward to, at any time, you are also welcome to access that email and certainly to share it with others. So, Masi Cho, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Barnett-Eichmann, and thank you again to Ms. Brace as well. At this point, I'll turn it over to MLAs for questions and comments, and I'm going to start with MLA Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm right side up this time. So thank you for that presentation. As somebody educated in the British Columbia school system, I'm not surprised at all to see that the alignment with the NWT is very good. I do realize as an adult that I think I had a lot more exposure to Indigenous culture and teachings as a child than some of my counterparts in other Canadian provinces. So I don't know if I have a lot of questions, but my first one, I guess, would be whether or not BC has been receptive towards the NWT and what sort of conversations are happening between the British Columbia Teachers Federation and the NWT, et cetera, to start the conversation. Do they seem as receptive to collaboration as Alberta used to be from the sounds of it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, MLA Knockleby. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. And there have been conversations with the Education Ministry in British Columbia, not necessarily the teachers union there, but they've been very receptive and understanding that we're not making a decision right now. We're exploring this opportunity, and British Columbia, of course, has a partnership with the Yukon, and so they're very familiar with the setup. So they've been very receptive. I can tell you that much. And same with Alberta. We've had a long-standing relationship with them, and whatever happens going forward, which could be a combination of a number of jurisdictions' curriculum, we want to maintain those positive relationships with whoever we're working with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Simpson. Emily Knockleby.
Thank you. Now I don't have to ask. My next question was, who does the Yukon go with, and are you talking to them for some tips, etc.? I have a suggestion just around the survey that you will be putting out towards the end of the month. I know that with some other government surveys, they tend to be very demographic specific, so that if you're not, for example, in the addiction survey, if you're not an addictions a person who's dealt with that person, you don't get to take the survey, or it's not geared towards answering fulsomely. So I just wanted to make a suggestion that perhaps that the survey be sort of set up so that we can, that anyone can respond, not just say parents or educators themselves. I know people like myself we were educated at some point, so we probably have some opinions on it without being that involved in that manner. And then I guess my next question for you is whether, or how much is this additional review of the Alberta new curriculum costing? And, is there, I would be concerned to see that hold up the selection process of the new curriculum, given that you do seem to have a very strong forerunner there. So maybe if the minister could speak a little bit to that. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Knockleby. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. And I don't think anything would slow the process down, but we do have to really look at the Alberta's new curriculum. So we are engaging with the same company. I can ask, perhaps the Deputy Minister might have those numbers on hand. I'm not sure, but I'll ask through you, Madam Chair, to go to the Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Minister Simpson. Deputy Minister Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. So we estimate it would cost around $15,000 for that additional research to be done in alignment with all the other research that was done. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. I'm going to turn the floor over to MLA O'Reilly.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm sorry I got cut off a couple times because the internet at home went out, but and maybe this was talked about, but I guess I'm just trying to understand what kind of complications there may be if we switch from Alberta to British Columbia. And I think that's where we're going, and I'll have another comment about that shortly. But is this about whether our students can attend universities in Alberta, or to me that's the most important thing, is that our students are going to have and that our schools are certified and can offer the right curriculum mix and so on, so that they can go to university anywhere in Canada. But I'm just trying to understand what some of the complications may be in switching from Alberta to, say, British Columbia. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. And no matter what we do, we're going to ensure that our graduates can go to university anywhere in Canada, hopefully anywhere in the world. That's a given. Some of the complications of a change would or could be around more technical aspects of the software that's used to track students' grades, etc. I think the members are aware that those certain software systems are very expensive, and not all of them are compatible. And so if British Columbia or another jurisdiction, if we are to change, has a different system and we would need to upgrade ours, I mean, we could be looking at costs that are prohibitive, but perhaps the Deputy Minister can provide some more insight.
Thank you, Minister Simpson. Deputy Minister Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. Well, just to build on what the Minister has suggested, is that right now we don't see any kind of repercussion as far as our students being qualified or meeting the prerequisite to get into post-secondary programs, whether it be at the college, trades, or university level. We have many students right now, about 1,700, that are going to school all over southern Canada. But as far as you know, this is a big decision for us. We just want to make sure that whatever curriculum we feel overall best aligns with the values and the needs of our system, is that all the parts will fit. And as the Minister alluded to, this could possibly mean that for grade 1 to 6 or grade 1 to 9, we use one jurisdiction's curriculum, because in the end it is deemed to be the most appropriate, and we use another jurisdiction's curriculum for grade 10 to 12. I think, however, it's more likely that we will choose one jurisdiction for predominantly the grade 1 to 12 curriculum all across, because in many ways that can make sense as far as that articulation across grades. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. MLA O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. So when I look at the results of the Malicet, at least as much as we can see of that on, I guess, slide 9, it would be hard to envision or even imagine that Alberta is going to come out any better, given the ideological bent of that government and the reported meddling in the development of the curriculum from media. I just cannot believe that Alberta is going to be any more aligned with what we really need as a result of the change in the provincial government there and so on. Look, so I'm not opposed to having the work done by Malicet, but it's not going to change this, I think, in any way, unless I'm, whatever. It's just not going to change it given the ideological bent of that government. So, but can that information on the Malicet report and what if the new evaluation is done, can that be shared with committee on a confidential basis? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. Yes, I'd be happy to share with committee, and I'll warn the committee it is large and complex, and not something many people other than MLA O'Reilly are going to sit there and read cover to cover, but I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We appreciate that commitment. I'm going to pass the floor over to MLA Johnson.
Thank Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of comments. If you asked me, back on my end, I think. If you asked me probably a year ago, I would have said that we should design our own curriculum. I had a number of conversations with people in the department and teachers, and I think when you ask people the problems with our education system, you know, a lot of it is poverty, it's housing, it's finding teachers, it's, you know, making sure we have enough funding. So I think curriculum is probably low on the priority list, and I'm happy to see the department's assessment tools here. And I guess my other comment would be, I don't necessarily want to weigh into the kind of fight that's happening in Alberta, but I think we have to recognize that the opposition government there has sorry, I'm getting a lot of
feedback. Emily Johnson, you've got a little bit of feedback on your line at the moment, so I'm not sure if potentially turning your camera off for your question or maybe throwing on a headset might help you out. Thank you.
Let's try camera off. Is that any better, Madam Chair? It might just be my internet.
Much better. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, also number one of our main problems in our education system is access to internet. But I guess another comment is I think we have to be aware that the opposition in Alberta has said they will introduce new curriculum if they get elected, and there seems to be a bit of a political dogfight going on. And I think regardless of which government's in power in Alberta, we don't really want to have our education system go through that of risking Alberta changing curriculum again. But my other question was, when do we expect Alberta to be able to share with us their 10 to 12 curriculum, which is what we have adopted wholesale right now? Because to me, that's reviewing the K to 6 is part of the work we have to do there. But when will we expect to see that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily Johnson. Minister?
Thank you. I don't believe we have an answer. I will... no, we don't have an answer. I see my deputy minister shaking her head no. So we don't know. And even this curriculum here, we received it when everyone else received it. And so the heads up we got was the press conference. So I'm not sure when that's coming out. I will note that the current curriculum that Alberta is rolling out, it's being done as a pilot. It is optional for school boards, and a number of the largest school boards, the Calgary Public School Board, Edmonton Public School Board, are not going to be part of this pilot. And I think that would, I imagine, would lead to some changes perhaps in the curriculum. So we don't know what it's going to look like in the end. We don't know what this K to 6 curriculum in Alberta is going to look like. So we have to, stay open-minded and ultimately base our decisions on the evidence and on what's best for our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Emily Johnson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that reiterates my point of, regardless of any ideological bent that may or may not be in that curriculum, that there's certainly some uncertainty going forward, and I would say the next few years of what Alberta's curriculum is ultimately going to look like, and what this pilot results in. And I'm not sure it's to our benefit to kind of be riding that uncertainty. But I guess my question is in regards to BC, which was in the first place in our 4 criteria there, according to that report. Do we have any kind of knowledge of whether they have a large curriculum reform on their hands? And I know curriculums always are slightly adopted and whatnot. I just want to make sure we're not switching one big change to get into another. So do we have any information on when BC kind of last updated their curriculum and if there's a large overall plan on that end? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily Johnson. Minister Simpson.
Yes, it was very recent in the, I'll go to the Deputy Minister, but I'll say that of the Western provinces, it was the most recently updated. And so that generally means it is the most advanced and most leading edge, but perhaps the Deputy Minister knows some more precise dates. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. So it was fully implemented in BC 4 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. Emily Nakobi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to come back, and maybe it's just something I don't quite understand sometimes about how things work with funding. But you talked earlier about the lack of capacity within the department to create its own curriculum, and I'm a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel. So I really like to hear about the create, adapt, adopt approach, which I think is the smartest. But in sort of the flip side of that, we also have that we're very limited in resources, limited in abilities, and it would just be easier to take a whole program, bring it in, I imagine, and just implement that as best we can. So I guess my question would be is, with Jordan's principle, which the mandate for that is to increase access or to make sure there's equitable access to healthcare, education, etc. Is there not some method to go to the federal government, access funding under that to help us with the adaptation of our programs or our curriculum, so that we or you as a department don't have to take that on with limited resources? However, then the federal government is taking up some of their responsibility for, when you look at the majority of our people are Indigenous. I just feel like is there a way to leverage that further to get more funding from the federal government to do this work for us, instead of us taking it on or not being able to take it on and being forced to take on a curriculum that may not meet our needs? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Minister?
Thank you. I would like to ask the Deputy Minister to answer.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister Mueller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. So the fact is that the jurisdiction of junior kindergarten to grade 12 education is that of provinces and territories. And, I think it's one that all provinces and territories really take quite seriously and are proud to have that jurisdiction. Our focus will be on how we work with Indigenous governments across the Northwest Territories in really hearing from them what they're envisioning, what they want for our students across the North. And the reason for that is because eventually, there's been an expressed desire by many of them to draw down their authority in JK to grade 12. And so over the years, we've been working with Indigenous governments on a variety of different courses, career and technology courses, or what's called locally developed courses, towards credits for our students in grade 10 to 12, and also really focused in on the culture, language, and history of the Northwest Territories, of the different Indigenous groups in that course development. And that keeps getting stronger and stronger. And as a result, those kinds of course offerings and that continued development in partnership with Indigenous governments and other organizations will ensure that in the end, whatever kind of core subjects we choose for mathematics, language arts, sciences, and social studies, that in fact we have all kinds of other opportunities for students to be really grounded in here in this place on this land, and knowing who they are as NWT residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. And Minister, Emily Knockleby?
Yeah, no, I did not in any way meant to insinuate that the federal government should control the curriculum. What I was asking about was funding to help us adapt so that you can do that work with the Indigenous governments, and that they would be able to then, have that say, and we would have the funds and the capacity to do so up here itself. So my question was actually about how can we use Jordan's principle and the idea of equal access to education to get more money out of the federal government to do the work for the adaptation, so it's not stressing our already limited funds. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Minister?
Thank you, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure if that's something the federal government would entertain, but I can look further into that, and I can get back to the committee about that point. And I will note that as was mentioned, I think Alberta started their their curriculum renewal in 2009, and here we are 12 years later, and something's rolling out. And there was some delays, but if it takes a jurisdiction like that long, it just shows what an enormous undertaking it is. And we have done some of our own courses here, our languages curriculum, and Northern Studies, and there's a couple others. And we know it does take a lot of work, and it does take a lot of funds. So I will be happy to look into that and get back to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for that commitment of looking into that for committee and reporting back. We appreciate that. I'm going to turn the floor over to MLA Lafferty.
Merci, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead, please, Mr. Lafferty.
Okay, just probably a quick question on the student online and distance learning. We serve 49 schools across the north. Just wondered if all schools are connected to online learning, the capabilities of each school. Where are we at with that? Because we have some communities on fiber optic, some are not. Just wondering the current status on that, the online learning. Do we have the capability of doing that in each school or some schools? Merci.
Thank you, MLA Lafferty. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. I'll note that as part of the curriculum renewal, we do have to look at what types of resources the different provinces are using. Are they heavily internet-based, which would be at a disadvantage for some of our communities, because we have a number of communities who access internet through satellite, and that is significantly slower than some of our other communities who are on fiber. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that it's the Department of Infrastructure who deals with access to internet, and they have either a proposal out or it's coming out to increase access for schools, and it should provide some significant increases when that rolls out. So I'm not sure if the Deputy Minister has some more specific information about connectivity, but I can ask you through you, Madam Chair, for her to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. So I'm going to talk about two different aspects related to distance or online learning. The first is our Northern Distance Learning program that does deliver currently the Alberta grade 10 to 12 core subjects in mathematics, science, social studies, and language arts, both in French and English. We currently have 19 small community schools that are participating in that Northern Distance Learning from across the territories, and in the upcoming school year, we hope to have 20 of our smallest communities. As far as other online or distance learning opportunities, we have to date a variety of schools, mostly actually in our larger centers in Yellowknife, access the Alberta Distance Learning courses, and it's often used by students who it doesn't fit into their schedule, and they'll take an additional course or two through Alberta Distance Learning. We've got word that current system is ending at the end of this school year, I believe in August. And so we are exploring right now other avenues, and we believe that we do have that for the upcoming school year for any students still in that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. MLA Lafferty.
Merci, Madam Chair. Merci to the Minister for providing that feedback. I hear that there might be a proposal in with the federal government. I certainly hope there is, because we should have all communities, the smallest isolated communities, should have the capability of taking online or distance learning, whether it be through high school, through post-secondary, through other curriculum they might want to explore. So I would highly encourage the department to work closely with the Department of Finance and make this a reality for this remaining of our term, 19th Assembly. I think it's very crucial that we have our communities connected. Because we're in modern times where technology, we should have the capability. So I just want to reiterate that, Madam Chair. Merci.
Thank you, MLA Lafferty. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. And ECE and infrastructure and finance do work together on this issue and have been really amplifying those efforts since the beginning of the pandemic. And from my end, every time I'm on the phone with a federal minister, whether or not it has anything to do with their portfolio, I talk about the need for investment in our broadband infrastructure in the Northwest Territories because I agree with the member. We need to ensure everyone has equitable access. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Minister Simpson. Members, are there any additional questions at this time for the minister or his staff in regards to this presentation? Hearing none, it's now 3:05, and I'd like to give everybody an opportunity to have a 10-minute break to stretch their feet. And we will then go in at 3:15 to the third and final presentation for today, which is the Education Act Modernization. So I'd like to thank you and your staff, Minister, for your presentations that you've delivered today, and invite the public back at 3:15 to go over the third and final presentation with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Minister. And I would like to call this meeting of the Standing Committee on Social Development back to order. And I will pass the floor over to yourself, Minister Simpson, for the presentation on Education Act Modernization. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to make sure that the staff members in the lobby have been admitted to the meeting.
Yes, from our end, everybody is in the meeting and nobody's waiting in the lobby. Thank you.
Okay, so my next two presenters are telling me they're in the lobby, and so I'll ask them to sign out and sign back in. Oh, there they are. All right, so thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to introduce the next two presenters who will be presenting on the Education Act Modernization, Mr. Sam Shannon, Assistant Deputy Minister of Education and Culture, and Benjamin Hendrickson, the Senior Legislative Advisor and of the Education Act Modernization. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister Simpson. I'll pass the floor over to Mr. Shannon and Mr. Hendrickson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here presenting to you today. So as everyone is well aware, the way education is provided across the territory has changed a lot over the last 25 years since the current Education Act first came into force. From changes in our communities to how technology has advanced, to how we organize and manage the education system, and most importantly, to how students learn and participate in their education. As part of the GNWT's mandate for the 19th Assembly, ECE is committed to increasing student education outcomes to the same level as the rest of Canada. Part of this work is making sure that the legislation that serves as the foundation of the entire education system is fit for purpose and meets the needs of students, parents and caregivers, teachers, education leaders, Indigenous governments, and the GNWT. We want to build a 21st century education system that is flexible and responds to the needs of communities, schools, and administration. We want to build an education system that will allow for the effective transfer of authority for education to Indigenous governments over time. ECE also needs access to important information that it currently can't accurately access. Information that tells us about student successes and challenges and allows the GNWT to target funding and resource supports to the students, schools, and communities who need it most. Throughout the course of our engagements, we want to hear what is currently working in the education system, what isn't working, and what residents want to see in a modern Education Act. We're also asking each of you for your help in reaching out to your constituents. The more voices we hear from between now and the end of June, the more a legislative proposal and draft bill will reflect the needs and goals of the people we serve. We'll move into slide 2, please. We have here a brief overview of the slides that are to come. So in the recognition of time, I won't spend any time going through this, but this is the order presentation we will follow. So I'll move then to slide 3, please. So as we know, significant gaps exist between NWT students and the rest of Canada, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students in the NWT, and between Yellowknife and smaller communities. As we know from the most recent OAG report and the findings of our own Education Renewal and Innovation Evaluation, the current Act can often act as a barrier to making the necessary changes to support student success. The goal of this project is to modernize the legislative framework to allow for the system-wide improvements needed to help improve student outcomes to the same level as the rest of Canada. Slide 4, please. The mandate of the GNWT includes the commitment to increase student education outcomes to the same level as the rest of Canada. One of the fundamental actions identified to support this is revising and updating the Education Act during the life of the 19th Assembly. Clear evidence of the need to improve student outcomes is shown in a few of the following graphs, which reflect data gathered through ECE's internal evaluation of the Education Renewal and Innovation. This evidence is also presented in the Education Act Modernization discussion paper. So first, on this slide, you can see that graduation rates differ significantly across the territory. A student in Yellowknife or one of the regional centers is more than twice as likely to graduate as a student in the smaller community. Going to slide 5, similar to graduation rates, students in Yellowknife and regional centers are significantly more likely to score acceptable on grade 12 English Language Arts diploma exams. And on slide 6, you'll see that up to a third of students in grade 12 and around 10 and 20% of students in grades 11 and 10 respectively are not advancing to the next grade. This is clear evidence that students need additional supports, and the education system needs to continue working on providing supports in schools. Of course, as the discussion paper notes, and we all know, there are many challenges that need to be overcome to close these gaps beyond just legislative change. This includes creating future employment potential in communities and providing stable and sustainable learning environments for students. One of the goals of Education Act Modernization, though, is to create a better and modern legislative foundation from which to build these supports. To slide 7, please. The main goal of modernizing the Education Act is to ensure that the legislative foundation for the education system responds to 21st century student needs, community needs, and the needs of Indigenous governments, who over time will take over more responsibility for education. It's important that we take this forward-looking view while also addressing existing challenges that are currently faced, such as ensuring ECE is able to access important information about student success and challenges, and clarifying roles and responsibilities of education authorities in the Act. A modern Education Act should provide the ability to make system and territory-wide changes that will ensure a basic level of effective and consistent administration across the territory. We need to build in the authority to transition responsibility for the provision of education to Indigenous governments over time as they draw down authority through finalized self-government agreements. This transition of responsibility for education isn't contemplated in the current Education Act, and this has to be done in collaboration with Indigenous governments. Hearing from them about what supports they need to build Indigenous student success is critical for a modern education system. Some benefits that we expect to realize through system-wide improvements include less ambiguity regarding the roles and responsibilities of the department from local administrators and educators. This includes everything from curriculum development to administration. A stronger voice and perhaps administrative role for Indigenous governments in the provision of education. This in turn will lead to more emphasis on the quality provision of Indigenous language and the maintenance of traditional knowledge, and a more unified and coherent education system across the territory, including around the management of processes like school calendars and school closures, both of which have shown to be important in shaping effective responses in times like 2020 and currently with the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Mr. Ben Hendrickson, who's the Senior Legislative Advisor for Education Act Modernization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. Mr. Hendrickson?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson and Mr. Shannon. So I'll start off today with just bringing up to speed on where we are at the moment with this work. So at present, we've completed the initial research phase, including a jurisdictional scan and literature review. We've taken into consideration as well the findings and recommendations of the Education Renewal and Innovation Evaluation and the OAG report, which gave clear points on areas of needed improvement for student success. So based on this research, we've developed the discussion paper, which you've all seen, as a tool for engaging stakeholders in the broader public in order to help identify shared objectives and opportunities for a proposed way forward. So we're now at the point of engaging all stakeholders, the general public, and Indigenous governments between now and June 30th to get input on what should be considered as we update the legislative framework for JK to grade 12. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, the total process for Education Act Modernization includes 8 large steps. So we're currently at step 2. So we're very early in this process. And that's something that's really important as we're engaging and as you're speaking to constituents and as we're engaging with the public to really highlight that this is a long-term piece of work. So the next 2 big steps for 2021 are the development of a What We Heard report and a legislative proposal. So based off of the public engagement that we're currently undergoing, those will be the next 2 pieces of work. And so the goal will be that a legislative proposal will be developed and with yourselves available in autumn of this year. Next slide, please. So going over the engagement approach, through broad public engagement, all stakeholders, Indigenous governments, and the public are being invited to provide input and name their priorities for a modern legislative framework. So this input will help confirm where there are shared priorities at the moment that we've identified in the discussion paper, but also what are the issues that we're missing and that are the priorities of the public that we haven't identified. So also available with the discussion paper on our website is a discussion paper and brief. As you've seen, the discussion paper is quite lengthy, so we've drafted a discussion paper and brief so that it's a bit more digestible. It's about 15 pages for stakeholders, and it still hits all the main key points of the discussion paper so that people can have something to be able to participate even if they don't have the time or the interest in all of the issues to go through the full discussion paper. We also have online surveys that have been developed for various audiences. These include surveys for the public at large. So regardless of if you're one of the next groups of stakeholders, you can still participate in, giving your opinion of this work. So we have specific surveys then as well for Indigenous governments, tailored for education staff and administration, for current and former students. So current students who are in JK to grade 12, and for post-secondary students, and then as well for parents and guardians. So throughout the coming weeks and months, ECU will also be hosting a series of town hall meetings, which are likely to be held in the later part of May, early part of June, for the public, as well as meetings with Indigenous governments and other stakeholders who request those meetings in order to engage on the discussion paper, the topics, and then for us to hear from them directly. So next slide, please. So this is just a list of some of the key stakeholders, like Sam with the overview slide, or Mr. Shannon, apologies, with the overview slide. I won't go into too much detail here. So if we go to the next slide, please. So in terms of the phases of engagement, we have 2 planned phases. So first is phase 1. So round 1 legislative proposal development, we have phase 1. And our goal is to involve key stakeholders, Indigenous governments, and the public in these conversations in order to answer those broad questions. So one of the goals of this work is to also hear those opportunities and concerns that people might see, which we haven't identified. So one of the really big important things to keep in mind through this work, and that we're highlighting to stakeholders, is that we really do not have anything cemented down at this point. We really are in the initial phases wanting to understand where the public sees the education system needing to go into the future. Next slide, please. So following the engagement, we'll draft the What We Heard report and share the information publicly. So this will be shared with yourselves, but also publicly, as this is a public engagement process. At the same time, we're working on drafting the What We Heard report. We'll also be using that feedback in order to begin drafting a legislative proposal. Next slide, please. And then once through the first phases of engagement and writing the What We Heard report and legislative proposal, we'll be into phase 2. And this will include standing committee being asked to review and provide feedback on a legislative proposal. So subject to any potential approval there, we'll begin drafting a bill, and that'll include further stakeholder feedback through engagement of a stakeholder advisory group. Next slide, please. Just to give you an update on some of the information that we've heard to date, and also some of the feedback that we've got to date, and also some of the meetings that have taken place and are planned, just in terms of survey responses to date. So we launched the surveys in mid-March, and actually I just double-checked before the meeting today, and we actually are up to 399 survey responses. So it's a pretty good response rate already, with still 2.5 months of time to go in the engagement process. So of course, surveys are a passive way of engaging. We've set the questions, people are responding. So it's one tool in our toolbox in terms of hearing the public viewpoints. But that is a great response rate. One thing always to be conscious of is Yellowknife response rate over everything else. So the current response rate is about 70% of responses from Yellowknife. So our job now is to make sure that we hear from communities. So just so you're aware as well, in the coming weeks, we'll be confirming dates for the regional meetings that will be happening in late May, June. And when we get those meetings confirmed, we'll start advertising the opportunities for engagement at those meetings. And at the same time, we'll be making sure that we highlight the opportunity to engage as well through written submissions to the email address, but also these surveys. Next slide, please. And again, conscious of time, as I know you all have the discussion paper and access to the discussion paper and brief on the webpage. As I go through the overview of the discussion paper points, I'm really just going to pick one or two key items out of each one of these sections within then the discussion paper, just so that we can keep conscious of time here. So next slide, please. So in terms of education system and governance, some of the big things to be conscious of are overlapping roles and responsibilities. So as laid out in the discussion paper, as Mr. Shannon mentioned at the start, there is some lack of clarity in the Act about different authorities. So one goal of modernization will be to make sure that we clarify those roles. And that's a big important part of that work is our engagement with the education bodies. So we have monthly meetings with the education bodies throughout the course of this engagement period to give plenty of opportunity to make sure that we're discussing those challenges, discussing those opportunities going forward. As well, regarding Indigenous governments and the role of Indigenous governments, and I believe this is brought up in a previous presentation as well, and Mr. Shannon brought this up in the introduction too. But there is, of course, as more and more self-government agreements are signed and Indigenous governments are wanting to take over control of education for JK to grade 12, the current Act doesn't lay out how that occurs. It doesn't really permit that in order to take place. So we need to build that into the modernization so that we make sure that we have the tools at our disposal to make sure that there is a proper handoff to Indigenous governments as they decide to take ownership of education. Next slide, please. So in terms of language and culture, I'll just highlight on the Indigenous language instruction and culture-based land learning. So 42 of 49 schools provide Indigenous language learning as a second language. So this is mostly done through core second language learning with a minimum of 90 hours instruction a year. Currently, there's a lack of legislative guidance for establishing and sustaining Indigenous language learning. And there's a real shortage of developed programs and learning resources. So these are all challenges before we even enter the classroom and begin employing Indigenous language instructors who have the availability, training, and qualifications necessary for teaching. So many of the same challenges exist around expertise and program development, translation for language instruction also exists for land-based learning. So we really are wanting to hear from the public, from Indigenous governments, and from all stakeholders about how we can build these structures into a new legislative framework, into this new modern legislative framework. Next slide, please. In terms of education program, what I'll highlight here, as we've already discussed curriculum and resource development today, is really about that information sharing. And Mr. Shannon mentioned this in the introduction as well. One of the challenges that currently exists is for the minister to fulfill his responsibility to maintain the NWT education system. He needs access to additional non-personal data regarding student success. And currently, ECE can't effectively be accountable to or respond to questions from the media, the public, other departments, yourselves, because we don't have access to that information. And so we need to build in those structures to allow access to that non-personal data, that sort of aggregate data about student success in communities and across the territory so that resources can be targeted more efficiently. So this was identified as a significant issue within the last OAG audit of early childhood to grade 12 education in the NWT. And just next slide, please. And so finally, regarding education staff, just regarding teacher certification, over the years since the Education Act was last revised, there have been lots of changes regarding teacher certification outside of the NWT that is now impacting the NWT. So, for example, changes to the Canada Free Trade Agreement require us to clarify processes and reasons where certification can be reviewed or refused. So changes to that process and requirements for other provinces and territories are some of those examples where the external impact is having that impact on us, and we need to make sure that we catch up to speed. So with that, I would like to finish my section and hand things back to Mr. Shannon.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson. I'd like to ask to move to slide 21, please. So to wrap things up, so for ways to participate, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have a website that is www.gov.nt.ca/edact, where you can find the discussion paper and all the associated resources, as well as links to all of our online surveys. And also we have a generic email address for all correspondence with this project that is eam@gov.nt.ca, where anyone can feel free to send in a submission, ask any questions, anything like that. This email address is monitored on a regular basis, and we do our utmost to respond as soon as possible. And then, as Mr. Hendrickson mentioned earlier, once scheduled, additional engagement opportunities such as the virtual town hall meetings and things of that nature will be posted on this site and will be advertised across the regular kind of print and social media outlets. So next slide, please. So next steps, as mentioned before, our period of engagement right now is running from March through till the end of June. Later this summer, following the engagement, we anticipate putting together a What We Heard report and sharing that around for additional feedback. And then flowing out of that will be our legislative proposal that will eventually make its way to committee for review and feedback. And then, so next and final slide is just an opportunity to say thank you for your time, and we appreciate your interest and look forward to any questions you may have. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shannon. Thank you as well to Mr. Hendrickson, and thank you, Minister, for your presentation. And so I'd like to pass the floor at this point over to MLA Knockleby. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and I'm glad to see that the surveys are not just one survey, but you're doing lots of different ways of engaging, so that answered my questions from earlier on as well, too, or comment made on the earlier presentation. I guess the only real question I have, and it's probably a pretty obvious one, but sometimes if we don't state the obvious, they do get missed. I didn't see Aurora College on your list, and I do, or Aurora University. I do understand that this is not post-secondary. However, I have to think that there might be some things that would come up in the Act that potentially down the line could impact how students transition from, high school into the post-secondary world. So I guess maybe could the Minister speak a little bit to the engagement process with Aurora College and that planning team to ensure that this Act lines up with what we might be doing over there? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I can ask one of the officials to answer. I'm not sure who would be best positioned here. Perhaps the Deputy Minister?
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Minister Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, and thank you for that. Thank you for that question, because it just brings to light that we have to do a better job of outlining all of the partners and the key stakeholders. So it is our intention, of course, to work and to be able to hear from Aurora College, both the transformation team and then Aurora College proper. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Mueller. MLA Knockleby?
Yeah, thank you for that. I figured that they definitely were going to be one. And if not, it would just kind of probably happen by nature of being part of the same department. But I appreciate hearing that. And I do appreciate that this is going to be a task. And I actually am looking forward to this piece of legislation because it is so important. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, MLA Knockleby. MLA O'Reilly.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think the department's going to have a little bit of difficulty trying to engage people in three different public processes at the same time. We've heard now about early learning, childcare, curriculum development, and now Education Act Modernization. And I'm on the ECE website as well. The have your say section, and the only thing that's up there now is the Education Act. So I think you want to think about how you're going to try to coordinate all of this stuff going on at the same time. So that's one comment. And the second comment I guess I would offer is I'm hoping that, look, last time there was an initiative to try to merge school boards or do away with district education authorities. That didn't go very well, and I hope that that's not part of the idea of what's behind this. In fact, you can't really do that with French first language school boards. It's a constitutionally entrenched right. And the last thing I want to see this effort result in is more litigation between the Francophone community and the government of the Northwest Territories. So I want to suggest that you have some representation on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee from the Francophone community, and that this effort is not about streamlining boards and trying to make everybody the same, because there's some regional differences that we want to recognize and embrace. So that's and constitutional rights that we have to recognize and protect. So those are more comments than anything else, and I'd be happy to hear what the Minister has to say. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. So the department does have a number of initiatives that we are engaging on, and these are just the education ones. Going forward, we have income assistance, we have skills for success, we have SFA. There's a lot going on, and so this has been a concern of mine as well. How do we engage not just with the public in general, but our Indigenous government partners, who we want to hear from. We want them to be participants, and they, like everyone, has limited resources and capacities. And so the early learning and childcare strategy, there has been a lot of engagement over the years. We have a number of documents, we have reports, we have all sorts of things, and we're relying heavily on that because I didn't want to go out and just do more consultation or that results in a report rather than something solid going forward. So there's much work done for those, so it's not as intensive of an engagement as it is with the Education Act Modernization. And similarly with the curriculum, it's a different type of engagement. But I do take the member's point, and we are live to that. And in terms of whether or not we're looking for a super board or not, I can tell the member that I've made statements already that I'm not looking to abolish the education authorities. What we need to do is learn from the past 25 years and build on those things that have worked and try and fix those things that don't work and are hindering our success. So there will be some give and take. Not everyone's, probably no one's going to be happy well, when we're all said and done, because everyone is so passionate about education. I recall in the last assembly there was very intense debates about the STIP hours. And that was just one issue. There's 100 issues like that in this Education Act Modernization. So it's going to be a challenge, and everyone is going to have to make compromises along the way. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister Simpson. Emily O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I understand probably a little bit about how complicated the Education Act Modernization stuff is, but I think you've also got to find a simple way to explain it. Modernization doesn't mean anything to a lot of people, including me, and yeah, so anyways, you're going to have your work cut out for you. Thanks. And I don't really have any brilliant ideas or suggestions. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Minister, do you care to comment?
Sure. So I agree. We have our work cut out for us. I am discussing this when I go to bilateral meetings with Indigenous governments. I'm having meetings with the DEAs, DECs. We have a number of different types of material that we're sending out. There's a lot of different aspects to this engagement, and I asked the department to keep it brief considering that we don't have a lot of time, but they could have talked for hours about everything that we're doing. Because the member's correct, it is hard to wrap your head around something like the Education Act. It's not something tangible. People don't see it. It's very operational. So I take the member's point. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Simpson. Emily Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess it's hard to provide feedback and I guess we'll wait to see what the department comes forward after all of the surveys and the what we heard report. And I'd like to commend the department on the work they're doing. I've looked at all the surveys for all the different groups, and I there's some big questions to be answered. But it's a little hard to provide comment when we don't have what actually the outcome is going to be. But on that. And I think one of the big questions to be answered, and this is in the survey, is whether we're going to try and legislate the funding formula. And then I think even more so specific to that is whether we are going to try and switch to some sort of needs-based funding formula, and how, I think we'd have to define what exactly that means. But I guess my question to the minister, is that something we are looking to undertake in this Education Act renewal, is a changing of the funding formula? Thank you.
Thank you very much, MLA Johnson. Minister Simpson.
Thank you. Yes, the funding formula is intimately tied to the Education Act, so it would be very difficult to keep one thing, change one thing and keep the other the same. So that will be part of it. Right now, there are responsibilities that lie with the department. There's responsibilities that lie with the DECs and responsibilities that lie with the DEAs. Sometimes those are the same responsibilities. And if we want to clean up those responsibilities so we can hold the right entity accountable, that means that we have to look at who we're funding and what we're funding them for and how that money flows. So that is definitely part of this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Simpson. MLA Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think that's probably one of the most contentious parts we will have. But I guess I lean towards we should try and accomplish that in legislation. I don't think education funding is something that should be tampered with lightly. And I know budgets will always look for places to cut, but I think the more we can protect education funding and provide that predictability going forward is a good thing. And I guess my second view of what I envision. The reason we have decided to bring the Education Act, some sort of kind of standing process that allows Indigenous governments to draw down education. And I know they can already do that at the negotiating table, and self-government allows, us to negotiate that. But, saying that's possible, and the reality is we haven't really had a full example of an Indigenous government taking on education to date in a self-government agreement. So I guess if the minister could speak to whether he anticipates the Education Act and the funding formula to set out explicitly, how that would work, and whether we can even do that, whether that's, kind of usurping the negotiating table. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily Johnson. Minister?
Thank you. And I don't expect to legislate anything in the funding formula about Indigenous governments drawing down authority for education, but right now the Act doesn't allow for it. The Indigenous governments have that right. The Tlicho Agreement, it states clearly that they have that right, but it's not compatible with our legislation, and that's on us to fix. And so that's one of the major drivers of why we have to do this. And so I'll leave it at that for now. But yes, that is one of the reasons we're doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Simpson. At this point, members, I'd like to open up the floor to find out if there's anybody else that has any additional comments or questions. Hearing none, I believe that we've come to the end of 3 fabulous presentations. Thank you very much, Minister, for your time today for these presentations. And I'd also like to thank your staff, Ms. Barnett Aikman, Ms. Caprillion, Ms. Brace, Mr. Shannon, and Mr. Hendrickson as well for their time and their expertise as well. And thank you. I'd like to ask committee to stay on the line, please, if possible, so that we can go in camera. And at that, I will thank the public for joining us here today for these 3 presentations from Education, Culture, and Employment. So can I have a motion to go in camera from a committee member, please? MLA Knockleby, thank you. And thank you again, Minister, for your time. Members will take a short break here while we disconnect the live feed. Thank you.